You and I have walked, or will walk, if you've booked for a future date, these streets to talk about 1888. Last time I took you back to Charles Dickens, a novelist who spent 30 years warning the country about the world that made these murders possible. Today I want to take you to a very different kind of witness, a man who went and lived in it on purpose, and then wrote it up, like a scientist filling a report on a disease. His name was Friedrich Engels. He was born in 1820 in Barmen in the Prussian Rhineland, the eldest son of a wealthy, devoutly religious cotton manufacturer. By rights, Engels should have spent his life exactly where his father put him, behind a desk, running one end of the family textile business. And for a while that's precisely what happened. In December 1842, aged 22, his father sent him to Manchester to work in the office of Ehrman and Engels, the family's cotton thread mill. His father thought he was sending his son to learn business, but what he actually did was hand him a ringside seat on the most brutal city in industrial Europe. Manchester in the 1840s was the world's first great industrial boiler room, the city that had invented the factory system and was now living with the consequences. And Engels didn't watch it from the comfort of the mill office. He had a guide. Her name was Mary Burns, an Irish mill worker in her early 20s, sharp and self-taught, who took him evening after evening, weekend after weekend, into the districts a well-dressed young foreigner had no business walking through alone. Little Island, Ancoats, the cellar dwellings by the River Irk. Engels later dedicated his book to the working people of Britain, saying he wanted to see them in their own homes, to sit with their conditions and grievances, instead of reading about them from a distance. That's the detail worth sitting with. Like Dickens, Engels wasn't theorizing about poverty from a study. He was walking into it, night after night, with someone who lived it. By 1844 he had what he needed and went home to Germany to write it up. The book was The Condition of the Working Class in England, published in Leipzig in 1845. It's often treated as a companion piece to Dickens and Elizabeth Gaskell. And in the same year Engels was writing it, Benjamin Disraeli published Sybil, with its famous line about Britain being two nations who might as well live on different planets. The two planets were the rich and the poor. But where Disraeli and Dickens wrote novels, Engels wrote something closer to a courtroom brief. Statistics, mortality tables, house-by-house descriptions stitched together with real fury. And here's a detail that should give you a chill. That book existed only in German for over 40 years. The first English translation didn't reach readers until 1887. And that was in America. Then Britain, 1892. Which means that in 1888, when the first body was found on Buck's Row, Engels' diagnosis of exactly the conditions that produced Whitechapel had only just become readable to an English-speaking public. Decades of documented warning arriving just as the warning came true. So what did he actually find in Manchester? He described a city functioning as a kind of undeclared war. Not soldiers and armies, but a battle of every man against every other man for a job, a wage, a place to sleep. He wrote about work not as dignity, but as compulsion. The more a man felt himself a person, he argued, the more he had to hate labour that gave him no choice in it. It's not a flattering picture of what unregulated industry does to people. It isn't meant to be. But it's the passages on women and children that land hardest, and they read like something a coroner might submit in 1888, not 1845. Engels recorded mothers going back to the mill 3 or 4 days after giving birth, leaving infants behind, milk soaking through their clothes by the afternoon because there was no time to feed the child properly. He quoted the women themselves. One who left at 5 in the morning and didn't see her children again until 8 at night. Another who worked Monday to Saturday without going home at all. He wrote about the infamous system of dosing infants with narcotics simply to keep them quiet while their mothers worked, and about a Manchester registrar who blamed a wave of infant deaths from convulsions on exactly that practice. And he made an argument that still unsettles people on either side of the political spectrum, that a factory system built on this kind of family separation didn't just impoverish people financially, it dissolved the family itself, left children growing up boarding in their own homes with no real attachment to anyone. Elizabeth Gaskell, writing North and South the following decade, put a harder edge on the same picture. Young men in the crowd, she wrote, cruel because they were thoughtless, gaunt as wolves and hungry for prey. Put those two writers next to each other. Engels on women worked past the point of caring for their own children. Gaskell on boys raised into casual cruelty by want. And you don't have to reach very far to arrive at Whitechapel in 1888, because that's where this connects. Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly. The canonical five. They were women living inside the conditions Engels spent 2 years documenting 40 years earlier. Homeless, cycling through common lodging houses on the nights when they could raise the 4pence for a bed. Kelly, the youngest, in her mid-20s, surviving through sex work because a system with no safety net for a woman alone left her almost nothing else to sell. These women were the predictable output of the machine Engels had documented decades before any of them trudged the cobbled lanes of London's East End. Dickens gave that machine a conscience and a plot. Engels gave it a post-mortem. Different tools, same diagnosis. A wealthy industrial society had built no flaw beneath its own people, and called the ones who fell through it morally deficient for falling. He outlived the murders by 7 years. He died in London in 1895, still at work on Marx's unfinished manuscripts. By every account he left, he'd have recognised Whitechapel instantly. He'd already walked its Manchester twin 40 years before, with Mary Burns as his guide. Thank you for listening. This is Richard Walker saying goodbye.